Hello friends and welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome to Set Apart Dives, guys. So big news. So on June 29th, the Supreme Court has overturned the affirmative action, deeming it unconstitutional for universities to consider race as a factor in university admissions under the Equal Protection Clause. So obviously, this has turned the internet upside down. There's been a lot of debate. So one side of the debate tells us this.
I was not surprised because Clarence Thomas has been on a mission to dismantle every institutional attempt to help and aid not just Black people, but any people who have been disadvantaged in this society since he's gotten on the court. Let me just be clear. I got into Harvard only because of affirmative action. I went to a school no one had ever heard of in Denver, Colorado, in a small suburb. I didn't go to Exeter or Andover. I didn't have college test prep. I just happened to be really nerdy and smart and have really good grades and good SAT scores. Right.
And the other side of the debate tells us this.
So listen to what Michelle Obama said in response to this opinion today. Of course, students on my campus and countless others across the country were and continue to be granted special consideration for admissions. Some have parents who graduated from the same school. Others have families who can afford coaches to help them run faster and hit a ball harder. Others go to high schools with lavish resources for tutors and extensive standardized test prep. So often we just accept that money, power, and privilege are perfectly justifiable forms of affirmative action, while kids growing up like I did are expected to compete when the ground is anything but level. You know what, Michelle? Same. And I'm white. I didn't have any of those advantages. I showed up the day of the SAT. I was like, it's the SAT today? Oh, shit. Okay. My friend loaned me a pencil. I never took a review class. We didn't have the money for anything. Like, it's not just a Black thing, but she and other progressives, Jason, are going to completely tie the racial inequity and its ongoing nature to this decision.
So obviously, this has been a contentious topic, and you might ask yourself, Nadia, why do you care about this issue? And truth of the matter is, I am a Black woman, and a lot of you guys would ask me, what my ethnicity is. I'm half European, white on one side, and I'm half African, Black on my father's side. So not African-American, but African. And living in the United States, obviously, as a Black woman and dealing with race, and it's so important to get that right. I think in the past couple years, close to a decade, we've gotten this topic of civil rights, of, racism, so wrong. The way that Black people understood this topic, like in the 60s, is completely different than I think the Black nation looks at the issue of race in 2023. And it's very important to talk about it. So I think, before I give you guys my opinion on this issue of affirmative action and also tie in my Christian view on this issue, I want to talk a little bit about, the initial thought behind affirmative action when it was first enacted. So one of the things that you have to understand, and I think I'm very passionate about us as Black people knowing our history, not getting our history or, popular opinion about the systematic racism and, this critical race theory that has smeared our true Black history. It's so important for yourself to go, and read. Or if you're going to be like me, who was obsessed with this topic back in college, you're going to find out that since Plessy versus Ferguson. This was enacted in 1896, where the Supreme Court ruled that, Black and white people, yes, they're equal, but they're separate. And this is why you had segregation for a while. And then you had another Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education, which was put into law in 1954. And the Supreme Court decided that it was not constitutional to say, separate but equal, to have Black people go into these bathrooms and then white people into these bathrooms. That's not true reflection of equality. So that got overturned in 54. And then, but still a lot of businesses, a lot of schools, even though segregation, especially in schools, was overturned and then socially overturned, a lot of people were still following the old rules and discriminating against Black students. So John F. Kennedy then in 1961, enacted affirmative action trying to counteract this true systemic racism that was still taking place in the 60s when Dr. King was fighting for civil rights, right? So was affirmative action necessary then? Yes. However, what affirmative action looked like in 1960s and what it looks like now are two different things, because we're having, as Black people, two different experiences. To say that America is systematically racist in 2023 after we've had a Black president, when we have a Black vice president currently, it's absurd. It's absurd.
You don't believe in systemic racism. What is your definition of systemic racism?
One of the reasons why I'm on the show is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule. That is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today, that the only way to succeed is by being the exception. The fact of the matter is we've had an African-American president, African-American vice president. We've had two African-Americans to be secretaries of the state. ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, CNN, Fox News all have African-American and Hispanic hosts. Yesterday's exception is today's rule.
If anything, Black people finally have the freedom. And here's the thing, to what degree can we create a equal and just society? You're kind of a little bit getting to this like almost socialist and almost utopian concept, because here's the thing, no matter how hard you try to get a society to be equal and fair, you can only reach to a certain point, you know? And I feel like we've definitely reached a considerable point of freedom here for all races. But here's the thing, at some point, you know, you can't keep pushing it forward without actually reverting. And I truly think that in 2023, we've embrace a lot of this critical race theory concepts of identity politics that's been actually hurting the Black nation, when we now in college campuses allow a lot of Black kids into these very selective schools, not because necessarily on their true aptitude, that competitive aptitude, you know, to be in an Ivy League school, you know, trying to get people just so we can make it look like diverse like America. It's not the answer. At the end of the day, justice is when we don't make the admission process based on race, but we actually evaluate people based on their effort and their hard work. You know, will there always be, to some degree, a level of injustice or inequality? It will, you know? And here's the thing, I want to talk about this really brilliant man. If you don't know Thomas so well, you need to read some of this man's work because he's brilliant. And I actually have a book by him called The Quest for Cosmic Justice. And this book is so brilliant. But basically, Thomas Sowell, you know, he is an economist. He is a Black historian. He is an excellent, brilliant mind and a Black voice in our nation. And I wish more people listen to him. One of the things I learned from this book is that, you know, this idea that you can create quality of opportunity, but you cannot predict equality of outcomes. So yes, you can bring in these Black kids into these Ivy League schools and, you know, and allow them to enter. But because at the end of the day, people are different. People have different IQs, different aptitudes, different strengths. You will never be able to truly predict quality of outcome. If anything, if you keep bringing kids who didn't quite, you know, test for this level of competition, you're actually not doing them a favor. Maybe they need to be in a different school, knowing that they scored well for that school, and that could be actually the better environment for them, versus, you know, putting them in these competitive schools where they kind of know they got in here just because they're fitting the race quota of the school. And it's not right, because they feel disingenuous. You know, people who are there truly know that they didn't deserve to be there, but because they're Black, you attach stigma to their race.
Do you believe that mandatory proportional representation benefits minorities?
No. In fact, I think one of the great handicaps that Blacks and other minorities face across the country is that they are systematically mismatched with universities in the admissions process. That is, if Harvard feels that it must have X% of Blacks, and if the pool is such that they can't get X% of Blacks at the same level as the rest of the Harvard students, they're going to take those Blacks who would have succeeded in some state university and bring them to Harvard, where many of them will fail. Or MIT is a better example, that the average Black student at MIT is in the bottom 10% of MIT students in math. But he is in the top 90% of all American students in math, because MIT students are so phenomenal in mathematics. Something like 1/4 of all the Black students going to MIT do not graduate. You're talking about a pool of people who score at the 90th percentile in math, whom you are artificially turning into failures by mismatching them with the school. Back in much earlier, you had a great increase of blacks in the universities through the GI Bill. You had nothing like that kind of attrition from that process because the student went wherever he could be accepted, wherever he met the normal standards, and the government simply paid the money.
I gather from your comments about MIT and Harvard that you don't think there's enough blacks out there who are qualified to fill the number of vacancies allotted for them in those schools. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the word qualified is really misleading.
Well,
the question is whether or not they are like the other students at Harvard and MIT.
Well, okay. Well, so there's not...
So they may be perfectly qualified. This same student might go through, God help us, I hope there's nobody here from Illinois, Illinois Institute of Technology and do well. But there's no reason why he should fail at MIT. There's no prestige in flunking out of the Ivy League.
I got it. So, but my point is, you believe there are not enough black women and men out there that are the same as white women and men to be able to go through Harvard and MIT.
If there were, it would mean that the whole history of oppression had done no harm whatever.
Well, so the answer is you don't think there are. I just want to figure out what you're saying.
It's not a question of what I think, it's a factual matter.
So factually, you're saying factually there are not enough.
Factually, this study's already been done by Clickguard at Harvard, and the figures are all there. Anyone can look them up.
Okay, no, I just want to hear from you. I want to know what you're thinking.
I truly think that the Supreme Court decision was a just one because I do believe that in our admission processes, we should be evaluating people in 2023 based on their effort and their action. I do not believe that America at this point in 2023 is systematically racist. There are racist people. I'll agree with that. But to say that we have, what was going on in the 1960s when we actually did need leaders like Martin Luther. And one of the things you learn about Dr. King is that he always talked about us moving forward, not through violence, but through love and through godliness, and getting ourselves right as Black people under God and fighting social injustice. So there was real injustice that was taking on, but that's not the same America that we have in 2023. This is why I so strongly oppose the Black Lives Matter movement, because it's making us Black people think that our Blackness, is our highest form of identity. And it's, and the sins of the past, they still have power over us and they still define our future.
Black History Month, you find
ridiculous.
Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? Well, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism?
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman.
We need to move away from that victim mentality. And I think a lot of white people, not intentionally, kind of reiterate this.
I take responsibility.
I take responsibility.
I take responsibility. Black people are being slaughtered in the streets, killed in their own homes. These are our brothers and sisters,
our friends, our family. We are done watching them die.
The fact that, on college campuses, we've gotten to this totally coerced thing of having Black spaces only. That is, it's almost like reverse, racism, where we're segregating ourselves and we're saying like, okay, we as Black people deserve our own spaces, because of the wrongs committed against us. We can never forget. We can never forgive. You have to understand that these white people are not the same white people who treated us bad in ages past. So why do we are holding these white people accountable for something? I never understood that. We need to move past that, and I truly believe, this has been a big question. It's like, how do we as Black nation prosper truly? How do we move past our social injustices, economic inequalities, and all of these things, And I have to say, if you are a Black person living in 23 and you're willing to work hard and you do not let race be your highest form of identity, but you let God and what God says about you, if you get yourself right with God, and you start understanding that you're a child of God and that at the end of the day, it's not the system, who's going to fix your problems, not the white man who's going to fix your problems. And it's also not the white man's fault that you're having trouble, but when you start taking personal accountability and being right before God, honoring God, understanding that the identity that you have as a son and as a daughter of God in Jesus Christ, that is the highest form of your identity, you will succeed, okay? And there's nothing that society can do or, any kind of racism do against you. But here's the thing. One of the most poisonous things about critical race theory is this underlying current of identity politics that says, you know what? Oh, because of your race, you have certain privileges and certain disadvantages. So like if you are a white person, you're truly privileged. And I always think about, what about the white people who live like in trailers and in very poor economic, situations? Where is the white privilege there? Right? People would say, well, I'm a black person, so I'm disadvantaged by all of these things because of all these wrongs committed in the past. That is wrong thinking. You're not disadvantaged. And whenever we buy into this narrative, we're like, oh yeah, the white man owns this, and this happened to me because of this, because of all this oppression and racism. You're buying into a lie. If you move away from that and you take the highest privilege in your life is the fact that you're a son and daughter of God and that no one can erase that. That is power for you as an individual to start looking at yourself not based through the lenses of your race, but through the lenses of who God says you are. And people will blame, all of these social and economic injustices on, this oppressive white system, when truly, the problem within our black nation, and I feel very strongly about this, is our fatherless homes. It's the fact that we be out here killing each other with gangs and things like that, ghetto culture, that wrongly tells us, ghetto culture, rap, violence, shooting, that's black culture. That's not black culture, guys. That is a culture of sin.
In Intellectuals and Race, you cite an observation by the intelligence expert, IQ scientist James Flynn, that just stopped me cold. After the Second World War, you've got large numbers of American troops remaining in Germany. For that matter, there's still several tens of thousands there today. And both black and white American soldiers had children with German women. And Flynn discovered that those children growing up in Germany showed no IQ differences at all. The black kids and the white kids, the same. Professor Flynn concluded that the reason was that the offspring of black soldiers in Germany grew up in a nation with no black subculture, close quote. Which means what? Which means they experienced exactly the same expectations. Is this the...
No. The expectations are external. The culture in which they grew up was not the culture in which black kids grew up in America today.
So they had...
There's no gangster rap that was pervasively available in Germany.
So here's what I'm getting. There is something about black subculture in America today that holds African Americans themselves back?
Yes, because that very same subculture held whites in the South back as well. That in the time, this mental testing in the First World War turned up, among other things, the fact that whites from various 4 or 5 southern states scored lower on the mental test than blacks from 4 or 5 northern states. And so it really was a question of the subculture that was there, which was a handicap to both.
Whenever we as black people get ourselves right with our Creator, that's when we're going to have stable homes. That's when we're going to stop shooting each other. That's when we're going to stop making this disgusting and terrible music that our kids listen to and having this generational, curse over us, That's when we're going to break free from that, when we get ourselves right with God. And here's the thing, even when people, even in slavery, let's say, years past, you would have if you ever watched the movie Harriet, it's a great movie, I would highly recommend, the black slaves had these amazing hymns of hope and the freedom they were looking, they would use Moses and the Israelites in Egypt, and they would identify themselves with that story, and they would trust God to bring them eventually into a freedom. In the late 70s, 80s, when the drugs infiltrated inner cities, sin took over and our, fatherless homes skyrocketed. That's when there been a degradation of the black culture when we moved away from God. Even now in a lot of black churches, I think not the right gospel is being preached. There's lack of true biblical teaching that it's still holding us back, so it's sort of like we have this like gospel history, because of slavery and all these other things, but we've forgotten the truth of the gospel, the truth of having a personal relationship with God. And so if you as a Black person, my take-home message is that if you want to succeed, whether you're a young student, whatnot, you need to stop looking at culture. You need to stop buying into these social narratives that you're disadvantaged somehow. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Having reverence for God, for His word, for His laws, how you should act, how you should conduct yourself, what you should listen to, what you shouldn't listen to. When God's word becomes the compass for your life, it doesn't matter whether you're Black or white, whatever you are. So stop looking at the system. We've come a long way. I truly believe we've come a long way. What you need to is have a identity shift. That's what's needed in the Black culture. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because I'm an immigrant. If anybody can have any more disadvantages, let's say, based on this whole critical race identity politics talk, is that, I am a Black woman. I'm an immigrant. I didn't speak English until 13 years of age. My mom and dad didn't speak English when we came to the United States, okay? We lived in this ghetto little neighborhood, that was just like 2 a.m., somebody's coming out and we're hearing the police and the sirens and there's this argument, my baby mama this, my baby, like literally this is the people that we live next door to, But my parents never gave into this victimhood mentality. Both of my parents washed dishes, on the weekends and went to school, learned English. And my parents told me this from a very young age. It doesn't matter what your color. In America, you can succeed. You just have to work extremely hard. And I worked hard on my grades, I worked hard. I didn't speak English. Eventually I spoke English, and then I worked very hard in school and I got scholarships. And I was able to have, complete a higher education and better myself. How much privilege did I have? Okay, I was an immigrant, didn't speak English, Black, a woman, like all the things that, this liberal media will talk about as disadvantages. How come I succeeded? I didn't have lots of money. I didn't have all these privileges that, I wasn't like white, right? America is not systematically racist. If you're willing to work hard, you can achieve. I never understood this whole narrative, how America is systematically racist. It's all mindset. It's all mindset. If you're thinking that the system will help you, we will never be able to create a perfectly just system. So the answer is individual response. It's not this, I'm going to wait till the system is fixed and then, maybe there's hope for me. Stop buying in. We preach this wrong narrative to our people and it drives me crazy. You can be higher than you were, but here's the thing, it goes back to getting yourself right with God. Do I think the Supreme Court's decision was right and just? Yes, it was just, because we need to be evaluating students not because of their race, but because of their hard work and effort, and I always say this, can you imagine if, let's say the NBA is predominantly Black. Let's just say that, right? There's Black, tall men, who play well. And they have to fit, to be an NBA player, you need to fit a certain criteria, a certain height, a certain aptitude, on this very competitive level. And can you imagine if I came into the NBA and I'm like, well, I'm so pissed off right now because I'm seeing all these Black men. I would like to see some Asian representation. I would like to see some Hispanic representation. And we just put all these, short people, different races on the NBA, and what would that be, right? In the weirdest of way, it's like we're getting rid of the standard of the game, what the NBA level competitive games should look like, because we're trying to make it more socially just, right? So same thing applies to high level competitive academics. There's a certain standard that you need to meet. Certain people will fit that criteria and certain people will not. And maybe you're a Black person who doesn't quite qualify for an Ivy League school like Yale or Harvard, but you can do very well in a different university. Your life will be just as fine, right? And, I know that Justice Clarence Thomas got a lot of hate, being accused of Black self-hate for saying that it's unconstitutional to consider race as because in what's become is like the race became the factor, not a small sub factor. It became the factor for a lot of these student admissions that were creating a lot of injustice for Asian Americans who are very smart and very hardworking, but they were being put on back burners to try to get these Black kids for schools representation. That's wrong. That is wrong. That is so wrong. I know plenty of Black African students, like students from Nigeria and Ghana, who are extremely smart and work very hard, and they get into those very highly competitive schools, but you know, and they're Black, and they're there not because of their race, they're there because of their big effort. And that is what we should be encouraging one another. Here's the thing, at the end of the day, I truly believe that stop looking at the system, blaming the white man or looking for the white man to solve our problems, and we align ourselves and submit ourselves to God and start honoring God and start being obedient to God. That's when we'll build great families. You know, we're going to know where to go to school, then we're going to have financial stability.
What advice would you give a young Thomas Sowell? How do you make something of yourself as an African American in America today?
The way anybody else would. You equip yourself with skills that people are willing to pay for.
Anyway, guys, these are my thoughts. Thank you for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.